Hello and welcome to another installment of the Wyfutbol podcast with me, Michael Dryden and Etches Adokru. This week, we take a look at the proposals for a World Cup every 2 years, how it would work in principle, the positives of the plans, and the negatives. Before we start, please follow us on Twitter at Yfootball_ and subscribe with us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, and YouTube. Good afternoon, Etches. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Can't complain. Arsenal won their first game of the season yesterday.
Nice.
So all smiles, all smiles. I wore my Arsenal top for the first game we played Brentford, and just got laughed out of the pub. It was a very sad day for me. So I'm going out to cinema later. Might wear it nice and proud on road. And yeah, I haven't really got much else to say about it. Really, I've been watching Ramsdale. If you haven't seen it, type in Ramsdale body feint. Timo Pukki's tried to tackle him, and he's just sent him to the chip shop and back with a body feint, and then just pinged it like 40 yards to, I believe, I want to say Pepe slash Odegaard. It was beautiful. It's probably better than that Messi free kick against Liverpool in the Champions League.
Oh,
That's what
really?
I'd say. Yeah, better
Oh,
than
God,
that.
yeah. No, nice one.
Yeah, yeah, top quality stuff. I know how you doing, John?
Yeah, not bad. When you wore that Arsenal shirt to the pub for the Brentford game, like prior to you turning up for that game, pretty mooted on the season. But then when you turned up with that shirt, I thought, this guy actually backs them.
How wrong he was.
I've never seen you wear that before.
We all make mistakes in this world, Jordan.
Yeah, we do. I'm pretty good. Sunderland won again this weekend. We've got 4 wins out of 5, which means we're top of League One, which is brilliant. I've moved to Wimbledon as of this week as well,
Very
which is
nice.
quite good, not far from the new Plough Lane. I haven't been in yet, but it looks ultra modern. Like I went past it, it
Really?
looks like a brand new shopping centre like Dubai. But I mean, maybe it's not as big as the Burj Khalifa, but yeah, it's so hoping to potentially get to some games there, which makes me a bit of a traitor as I support another club in League One. But it'd be nice to see some live football. Everyone likes Wimbledon as well, don't they? The crazy gang of old. The club really went down. Um, that they resurrected the club. The fans did it. It's all very nice, lovely story. That's just basically me finding an excuse for why I'm going to watch another team in League One. But
Yeah, so the reason for this episode is Arsene Wenger, the king, the most iconic manager in Premier League history. At me if you want. We can fight, do whatever. But he's mentioned now he has his new role within FIFA, which I'm sure everyone's aware of. I think he's head of development. And he previously said on numerous occasions that he wants to host two World Cups, or a World Cup every 2 years, sorry.
mm,
But the question is that necessary? You've got traditionalists out there, filling his dog, the usual
mm,
suspects who, part of the acclaim of the World Cup is that wait, during 4 years, so much changes in football. There are new managers, there are new players on the scene. There's that iconic picture of is it not Gabriel Jesus, who's in the streets of Brazil in 2014, and then 2018, he's representing, or he's playing for Brazil himself. So
mm.
much changes in those periods of time.
Yeah.
Anticipation is built. Certain teams are rejuvenated, others are on the decline. But a part of that as well is that as we're seeing or as football moves on, it's such a big sport, and the clamor for more games and the interest is just so intense that I can kind of see reasons for it. And I also think that the logical, the thought process behind, oh, if we have it every 2 years, it loses its sparkle. There's an element that the World Cup has already potentially lost its sparkle, and this could help bring it
Mm,
back. I
yeah.
think my dad always says to me in the 50s and 60s, or even the 70s, back when TV was quite new, and it definitely wasn't broadcast. Football wasn't broadcast the way it is now.
Yeah.
There's this air of mystery around loads of sides. I mean, you could see Brazil come in the 60s, or imagine seeing Pele in 58. You'd have no idea who this guy is, and he rocks up, and it's absolutely incredible. And I think that was kind of like the lure of the World Cup all the way back then. It's lost its way now with everything. You can watch any league all the time, either on pirate streams, if you don't want to admit you're watching pirate streams,
I
or
think you just have right there.
yeah, or if you're doing the traditional methods of using Sky or whatever online app exists out there. But I think people are trying to capitalize on the interest, but on the flip side, is it too much?
Yeah, another great example of like a mysterious, well, not, well, mysterious footballer that you see and realize they're amazing at the tournament would have been Eusebio back in the day. There was also that story of like the North Korean team staying in, I think it was in Teesside, during the 1966 World Cup and played at like Ayresome Park, where Middlesbrough used to play football, and just stories like that are quite interesting. Obviously, the North Korean side of today wouldn't have too many well-known players, but as you said, a lot of the great players of that time wouldn't have been. They might have been known, but you wouldn't be able to see who they are. I wouldn't have seen them play football. Um, and yeah, in current day, all the world's major talents play in the top five domestic leagues and European competitions. It doesn't matter if those players are South American or if they're North American, if they're African, whoever, they all play in Europe, largely, the best ones anyway, in the top five major leagues and in the competitions. So we get to see those players regularly, as you say, in the era of TV, but no matter how you get to get your TV. Um, so, I mean, people are wanting more big World Cup games. I think it's almost like paradoxical in a way because you want more of these games that are amazing, but I think part of the reason, and I might want to touch on it, is part of the reason these games are so magical is because you're watching them every 4 years. We see France against Brazil,
Mm.
for example, once every 4 years, and that's why it's so magical. If that starts happening every 2 years or every year, that becomes less magical because you see these matchups time and time again. And is that almost paradoxical and against what people actually want? You want more of something that actually then becomes diluted in terms of its allure. And to an extent, we have experienced, I think, similar things in the Champions League in terms of that like dilution of these top games. So we don't have more Champions League games now, but what we do have is more of the big teams playing against each other because
Yeah.
seemingly in the latter stages now we're constantly seeing the same teams because they're getting bigger and bigger. So the likes of PSG versus Real Madrid, PSG against any other side, and the top five teams, it's no longer this big spectacle because we see it year on year. I think on Tuesday Barcelona are playing Bayern. I mean that's a group game, um, but we're used to seeing these fixtures so much now, and if that happens to the international stage, well, is that just going to ruin the allure? Because for me in the Champions League, it almost has to an extent. I'm a lot older now than what I once was when I first started watching European competition, but at the same time, I also see these games all the time now, and it just doesn't seem as I don't know, as interesting to watch. And they don't seem as large as they once were. But this is an interesting topic because we all love major tournaments. The Euros is something that was brilliant. The World Cup in Russia in 2018 was brilliant. And also, I felt as if I had a lot of negative points for this, but actually, it made me think the chances of England hosting a World Cup therefore increased quite substantially
Yeah,
if
it does, doesn't it?
this happens. So that'd be great as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you as well. I think UEFA, FIFA talk a lot about how there's waning interest in younger populations, and I think they're trying to find the right mix to recapture that growth as well as building the established growth which football already has, and they haven't quite got it right. There's a
Mm,
lot of football. There's a lot of football on TV during lockdown, and it got a bit overkilled, and we don't want the same thing to happen to the World Cup, but at the same time, interest is very high in football generally, so it's trying to find that right balance.
yeah.
But talking about the World Cup generally, first started back in 1930, where the inaugural tournament was held. Only 13 teams were invited, so
Mm,
there was no qualifying. You just invited along for the very lucky 13. Since then we've seen successive expansions, format remodeling. It's 32. It's currently 32 teams, which is a 2-year qualifying process, which involves over 200 teams around the world. In 2026, which is in Canada, Mexico, and the US, it goes to 48 teams,
mm.
which the traditionalists, again, Phil and this dog, have complained about because it's a snobby view. I think I understand that, right? You can point to games like England versus Andorra and say, "Oh, it's a waste of England's time." It's just same if I don't know, Rwanda gets to the World Cup and they face England. People say it's a waste of their time, but there are so many fans across the world. Football is such a global game
Yeah,
that for some of these countries to be able to even share the same pitch as some of these players is such an achievement and such a spectacle for people all across the world. And there are upsets. There's the famous Roger Miller goal for Cameroon in 1990. There's been fantastic moments across the years of multiple teams, and I think the World Cup needs that magic. And by having more of their side, you could potentially do that. But that's
mm,
a topic for another day. I think the constant growth of these sides, the commercialization means that everybody wants a piece of the World Cup, either in the TV or in the flesh, either tickets and games. And I can see why people are thinking, right, we need to do it even, we need to shorten the time frame from 4 to 2 years because the demand is so great. And
yeah,
we've been talking loads about being able to go to World Cups because 2026 is a long way away. If you
yeah,
can't do, if you can't do 2022, 2026 is a long way away. Then if you don't do 2026 because it's very hard to go to Canada, Mexico, and the US is very expensive, what do we do then? we wait for the next another 4 years after that, and by that point I'll be 68 by then. So these running out of time to watch a tournament.
Mm.
So I don't blame FIFA for trying to essentially meet that demand.
Yeah, I think on the 48 team point, I mean, I do think it's arguably too big. I think if you look at the Euros, and I find the Euros a success every time, that's largely because it is 24 teams, and even so, that was extended from 16. I know that the Euros is, it's just one continent, restricted to one group of teams, so you're never going to have a 48 team Euros, are you? So there's more reasons than just the kind of logic for that. Um, but you do get a lot of games that are formalities. I know what you're saying. If England play against Rwanda, say in a World Cup with 48 teams, it's great for Rwanda. It's great for their development. Football is more than just. I mean, um, how many nations in, say, the continent of Africa or Asia that are growing and developing so quickly are suddenly having an appetite for the game? We've seen in the Premier League, like with the whole the Project Big Picture stuff, and even with the Super League, I feel like a lot of these kind of power grab moves from like the Premier League and the Super League are, in terms of, people see it as consolidating power, but it's a means of just like protecting their brand. And so they can also, with the Super League and Co, try and work on getting that brand shipped overseas. It's no longer about, okay, can we build fans in Europe? It's about, can we build fans in these developing nations in Asia and Africa? And I kind of get the sense that's what FIFA are trying to do here, in a
Mm,
sense that they're trying to, particularly for like maybe it's in Asia and in Africa as well, where the African Cup of Nations is a big competition as well, but compared to the Euros and the Copa America. But for some areas of the world where they don't have that, potentially that continental competition that isn't as big as say the Euros is for us anyway, um, then another World Cup every 2 years is great. And also it allows them to see the best players. You might have a continental competition in Asia, but you're not going to get any of the top players currently because they're not as developed footballing wise. Whereas if the World Cup comes to town, then you're going to see those players. And again, I mean, kind of contrastingly to what I've just said, really is, World Cup is, a global competition and it needs to be inclusive to all. So in theory, if you make it 48 teams, that allows you to continuously expand the qualifying, and also the competition itself to actually take in more teams from around the world. Even though in theory the qualifying should cater for that. But then again, if it's so hard for these teams to actually even get into the competition,
mm.
what's the point for them?
And you touched on qualifying just then. That's the next point, is how is it going to work? I think the international format of qualifying, in particular in Europe, because that's where our lens is focused on, because we are in those shores or in that continent,
Mm.
is kind of flawed. There's this age-old argument about, oh, there should be pre-qualifying for certain sides and all of that sort of stuff, which I've always been in favor of. And I've been in favor of
Mm.
it because I'm Nigerian as well, and they do it in Africa, and I just think it's a lot easier. I get the whole Andorrans should have the choice or chance to be able to play with England and stuff. I do understand that. But I also think there's a massive element where if teams like Andorra win consistently in pre-qualifying, that will actually better them in the long run to actually go into the final group stage, as it were, to then compete for a World Cup place, rather than some of these sides, unfortunately, don't score goals for most of the group, and it can be quite demoralising. It's great to show a picture of like Closer and stuff, and all these players, but then if you're not going to win, then you need that element to it. So what Wenger suggested is two international breaks in March and October, with only four nations in a group playing six qualifying games, which he believes will ensure more high stake games and high emotions. So that will probably allude to having pre-qualifying like we already see in Africa, or would have a hell of a lot of groups. So I don't know how that would work in terms of the seeding and stuff,
Mm.
because we could end up seeing some very interesting groups. So it waits to be seen how they'll actually do that.
Yeah, I'd imagine the pre-qualifying would happen, like, obviously prior, and then it would come through to the main qualifying parts, which would then seed in a very quite similar way, perhaps. I'm not sure. I think your point on qualifying's very apt, because I don't think I don't think it's good for San Marino. I know San Marino is a very very extreme example because it's a very tiny population there, but for any minnow in football, I don't think it's a good thing to go to Wembley and get beat 7-0 off England. Like, what is that good for the nation? I don't think it is. As you said, the picture with Rooney, or with Kane, sorry, um, is great, but it actually might benefit them more to be playing in qualifying groups amid their peers who actually are similar, um, of a similar size and have more competitive games, because then that's going to create more wins, spark more interest in the sport in that country as well. and actually allowed them to develop rather than finishing bottom of Group F World Cup qualifying group with England top. Having scored once. I think there's a Twitter account have San Marino scored yet, and it's got like a number of thousands of followers, and that just symbolizes um, how small they are, and they score like once or twice per qualifying round. That might even be less.
Hmm.
So I think the pre-qualifying idea is a really good one, even absent to this discussion about a World Cup every 2 years.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's one of them, isn't it? I think they're on the money with a lot of this. Is there is a problem within the international game is whether the proposals that they're putting forward are the right ones. I do think yeah, it would be nicer to have shorter qualifying campaigns. It'd be nicer for it to be a lot cleaner, but is it feasible? Wenger's gone and said four nations. What's he talking about? Is he talking about the whole world? Because how will that
Mm,
work in South America where they have one group? How will that work in Africa where there's
yeah.
52 countries, like or
Mm,
50, 51, 52? I can't remember the precise number. How can you be so sure that it's going to work across the board? There have to be some tinkering with that as well, and kind of the benefits as well. Because there are some benefits to this. Is the traditionalists might complain and be like, oh, it's diminishing the value of the tournament, but overall, no one's going to say no.
mm,
You're seeing Kylian Mbappe, you're seeing Neymar, you're seeing Messi, who is close to retiring, and Ronaldo as well. So many great players across multiple nations across the world. You're not going to say no to see them go head to head on a more frequent basis. But the big issue in all of this, and it kind of comes into the club versus country divide, is always, will the clubs be happy? I think the clubs are never happy. I don't think they'll be happy until there's no World Cup or no Euros,
mm.
because there's literally always a problem. Can I go to the Olympics? Nope. Can I go to this friendly? No. It's like, all right, okay. Can I go to? No, you
Yeah.
can't go to
Will
that.
you
It's
sign
like
your contract? Nope.
yeah, it's constant, right? The clubs have so much power; they pay the wages and stuff, so that'll rumble on. But we'll come on to that in terms of the negatives. I think a really interesting one, which I was doing some research about, was the backlog of hosting nations. I read that Morocco have tried to host the competition on 5 occasions. I know that FIFA are very keen to get the World Cup moving across the globe. Yeah, it's great when it's in Europe and America, but we have to come out of, and South America as well. We have to get out of that logic. Football is so global. I think sometimes as fans, especially in this country, we really don't understand how big it is. I know football's massive in Nigeria, I know it's massive in Africa, I know it's massive in Asia, Japan, especially with the players that are moving. Because of globalization, some of these people's favorite stars are in England, they're in Italy, they're in Germany
Mm,
playing, they're in the Western game playing. So many of these countries would absolutely love to host a tournament. So what hosting every 2 years does is it releases that backlog. You mentioned England. I'm sure England want to host. I know Boris Johnson said that, but as the recent news has shown, Boris Johnson says a lot of things. So it's one of those. I mean, I know South America would love to have it back. With the success of Brazil and Argentina, I'm sure there'll be countries there, and also other nations as well. I know that the Middle East are now very keen. After Qatar, we haven't actually hosted it yet, but I know Saudi Arabia have been interested. Australia have always spoken about it. So I
mm.
think it would really release that backlog of countries to actually say, okay, you can host this tournament, and then people aren't crying because
Yeah.
yeah, no one wants to see grown men in suits crying. Um, the international calendar is actually now set all the way to 2026. So no change can really take place until then. Is definitely going to rumble on for a very long period of time. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of who throws the toys out the pram first. But I do think in terms of trying to you know cash in on the interest within the game, this is the right way to go about it. We've spoken before about FIFA's involvement with the money. So on the flip side of all of this, it always boils down to money. And I love talking about cash, but FIFA benefit from this as well. Of course, FIFA are going to benefit hosting a tournament every 2 years.
Mm,
And all the sponsorship and all of the deals that these countries have to sign, the infrastructure. When we looked into the Qatar World Cup, where
yeah.
FIFA, get money off you if you build stadiums for it and all that sort of stuff. So you can definitely see the advantage of the fans saying, "Hey, yeah, the World Cup's in my backyard," and FIFA rubbing their hands together, being like, "Yeah, we've got loads of money." And as as interesting as FIFA's plans are, and Wenger is a saint, FIFA are very corrupt. So
Yeah.
there's probably something else boiling on underneath this, which is why they want to do it. But that awaits to be seen.
Yeah, true. We discussed before we were on air actually about like how it might look. how it might interact with the Euros. I mean, if we end up having a World Cup every 2 years, the chances of the Euros continue to go ahead is very unlikely. I mean, to be honest, as a fan, if you asked me, would I rather watch the World Cup? Because effectively, every other year we get a tournament currently.
Mm.
We get, we miss a summer, then we get the Euros, we miss a summer, we get the World Cup, and that happens. It's happened for throughout our lifetimes. Um, Instead, it'll still be that. It's just that instead of the Euros, it'll be the World Cup. And if you ask me, would I rather watch the World Cup, every other year, or one of those years being the Euros? You know what? I possibly say the World Cup because I was singing the praises of the Euros earlier in the episode, because I do often find them to be quite good for the fact that they are smaller. But that's also because we're lucky in Europe to have a lot of the best players playing those competitions anyway. So you get that. You get both sides still. You still get the kind of, it's smaller, it's closer to home, it's easier to travel to if you're a fan wanting to go there. You got more chance of winning it. So England got the final this year. Haven't got to the final of any competition, obviously, since '66, but the chances of getting to a World Cup final, like any country's chances in a World Cup versus their continental competition, are always going to be slimmer. So there are a lot of positives to the Euros, but I'd actually possibly rather watch the World Cup every couple of years. Another benefit that I foresaw as well of having more World Cups, and it links this idea of the minnows and the developing nations of this world and developing football nations, kind of, and the mobility side of that is, a lot of players get good moves, manage to go from
Yeah.
smaller clubs in more developed countries, or less developed countries, sorry, um, to bigger sides and get good contracts on the back of it. I mean, great example of the high profile names. Biggest one to my mind that came straight away was James Rodriguez. I didn't know who the guy was before the World Cup in 2014. He ended up getting ended up getting the Golden Boot. He scored that worldly goal. Not long after that was playing for Real Madrid. He's managed to kind of mobilize, or so his mobility into the game there has just been so drastic off the back of that World Cup. We've got Asamoah Gyan, went to Sunderland. Thought I'd throw him in there.
I was waiting for that one.
But then if you just take away the well-known names, I mean, there's so many. I was, with work recently, we were working with a Polish consultancy, and we played them on Wednesday, and they were saying that after because I was mentioning the last time Poland did really well in the competition, and it was in the 2016 World Cup, they got beaten on pens in the quarterfinals by Portugal, and the guy I was talking to was saying that a lot of the players, if not the entire 11, end up getting good moves at the back of that around Europe. Notably, was Kryjoriak, if I'm saying his name correctly, who went to PSG
Mm.
on the back of that. Even I swear it's that around that time that Adariz Milik went to Napoli. So I mean, there's a lot of players that are getting good moves. I think Zielinski eventually went to Napoli as well. So for a lot of players, that for European players, and not just describe the Euros there rather than the World Cup. But that logic still applies if you are playing for Colombia in the 2022 World Cup, and you're not that well known, or you're playing for Peru or any other nation that is the footballing world there is still developing. You can put yourself on the world stage, and you can almost sell yourself, and you could get a really good move at the back of that. And the fact that this happens every 2 years means that those players that don't play in Europe, or don't play in big leagues, but actually talents coming through that haven't been spotted by the big clubs elsewhere, and by data as well. There's a big reliance on data now. Not
Mm.
every player shows up in terms of statistics, and depending on who you're looking for. Dennis Bergkamp, a great example. But
Mm.
actually, a lot of players around the world being able to prove themselves on the world stage, even in qualifying, is great for those players, for those developing nations.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of these players are tracked by clubs and analysts. I think the key thing is there enough there from what they're seeing beforehand? Is it enough to actually buy them? And that World Cup, when they're going against, in some cases, very high level opposition, is the confirmation that certain clubs need to buy them.
Mm.
We always talk about all the time where you get massive players, or you get very small players in what I'd like to call Europeans B League. So Genk, I know Genk have produced so many ballers in Didi,
Yeah.
Kevin De Bruyne, I know Courtois was there. There's hundreds of players that come through Genk, and we always say, oh, why do they not get bought out by big European side straight away? And sometimes they do. In the case of Kevin De Bruyne, he was quite young, but he ended up being sold because Chelsea thought, oh, you know what, he's not going to cut it here. And I think a lot of these players, he may be playing in, I know Michelin's another one as well. They may be playing in the World Cup, and then a side might say, yeah, we have picked this guy up. That we didn't think he was showing enough in that league to potentially warrant a move, but
Mm.
he's just kept Mbappe quiet for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
So then that could be the ignition they need to say. Then say, you know what? we actually will go forward with that transfer, and then we can see these players on the greater stage a lot quicker than we might not do beforehand.
Yeah.
So that'll be a really interesting point actually if the World Cup was to go every 12 years. So obviously the negatives are quite apparent for a tournament like this. The main one is clearly the clubs crying. Football clubs just love to cry when it comes to international ball. They feel like because they pay their wage, they have this divine right to control the player. Like, can I drink
Mhm.
water? No. Can I breathe? No. Can I go to the international tournament? No. It's like, it's just held against their will. But a lot of these big European clubs, we spoke before about Africa being in support. African teams are very small in comparison to the international nations. Same with Asia, but then we're talking about the European powerhouses, right? And they have a hell of a lot of say in the ins and outs of football. And they think that the football calendar is too congested and they'll only increase. Wenger's looked to allay fears of a burnout by introducing a mandatory 25-day break post tournament. I don't actually know what holidays clubs impose on players that get to the final. I feel like it's one of those discretionary things where they decide a time because I know that for sometimes if you're third choice goalkeeper, you might come back after if you let's say you win the tournament, you would probably come back after a fortnight because they would say, well, you didn't really do anything, you've had a bit of a party, so you can come back earlier. I know some players take a lot longer. That 25-day minimum break plus the fact the tournament is already a month means that essentially, clubs pre-seasons are heavily impacted and that's already the case now and clubs just aren't really happy with that.
But before the season started, I swear there was like that sort of talk was mooted in terms of Ben Chilwell. He didn't even play. I know he's training. To be fair, he's training every day. They're traveling around. It's not like he's been on the beach for a month, but he didn't
Yeah.
even play.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's that mental state because third choice goalkeepers are very unique because you're never playing. So let's
Mm.
let's get that out there. You're never playing. I know to be fair, Unai Simon did start for Spain. I don't really know what ranking he was in terms of keepers going into the tournament, but generally speaking, you're never playing. So
Nah.
for you to then say, "Yeah, I need 25 days off, please," yeah, the coach would raise an eyebrow and be like, "Is that necessary?" But that's what Wenger wants to impose. I think it's the fear that the calendar is too busy already, and there is that constant thing. We saw Eric Cantona have that speech. The one where he didn't make any sense, where he was talking about like birds would be flies and flies.
It's the Seagulls.
Yeah, yeah. He was
Yeah.
banging on about how players are robots and they're being used for sport, which is the game, and basically their welfare is not cared about. Which is an ongoing thing in all sports because you want to increase demand, you want to increase engagement, you want to increase the number of games that are being shown, but this will impact the players, right? You can't
Mm.
play every single game day of the week because it's just not going to work. So I can understand why clubs are kicking off about that and how it will affect the season. There's also the element as well about how it will affect the Euros. We spoke about that before. I know that African nations and Asia as well host tournaments all the time. With our European Glens on, or Glens, not Glens, Glens Vodka, sponsoring this episode of Wyfutbol. I tried to drop it in subtly.
Oh, you saved it. You saved it very well there.
They're our new partnership, in case you're wondering. But yeah, it's one of those where how how will you fit in the Euros as well? Will it diminish that tournament? You know, again, that player burnout thing. You don't really want players who play a tournament every summer. Because then for the best players in the game, that will impact them. If I'm Mohamed El Neni, that's a bad example. If I'm I can't think of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang's a good one because he's not going to be at loads of African Cup of Nations because Gabon don't go, and he's not going to be at any World Cups particularly because Gabon don't go, even though he's a very good player. But then when you start taking your Sterlings, your Benucci's, your Neymars, that is impacting every summer because Brazil are going to get there, England are going to get there, Italy are normally going to get there, and then we talk about burnouts of these players. When do they recover? We're seeing players put off surgeries like Marcus Rashford, but then when does it end? Oh, if I wait till summer, I've got the Euros. Oh, but then I'm going to miss the start of the season for United. And then if I'm injured for 4 months for United, I might miss the World Cup squad because it's the next year. So it's
Yeah.
like, it's
Yeah.
that element of player welfare, which I think they have to balance. And I'm not too sure how they managed to do it.
No, I think it's a great point. I mean, if we're just constantly playing tournaments every year and year, I mean, I hope we don't because I think every year is excessive. Like that gap in between, I think gives you that hunger back. I think, to be honest, I wouldn't mind seeing the World Cup replace the Euros and so have that every 2 years. It'd be a bit of a shame, I suppose. But if you've got more World Cups, then there's more chance of these even European nations hosting it. So I think it's still beneficial. I think for negatives for me, there's kind of 2, maybe 3 points on that. I mean, we touched on it earlier around how hosting World Cups is not always great for developing nations. The great example of that is the World Cup in South Africa. We talked about in the last World Cup and around this idea that FIFA like to award tournaments now and again to developing nations because it develops a lot of construction contracts. Someone like South America was not prepared for a World Cup. They prepared their bid, their plans, fair enough. Not if they would have had 6 or 7 years or whatever to build, to get ready, but they weren't prepared for that. A lot of construction work needs to be done in certain nations, like in Qatar. That is the same, and also in Qatar, we've seen the human rights issues around that because some of these nations do have different views on human rights. One and two,
Mm.
again, they have so much infrastructure to build, and in such a short space of time,
Yep.
that the pressures are massive, and the amounts involved are massive, and it creates this pressure environment that leads to people being abused and people getting taken advantage of. Like in Qatar, it's tricky because when it was in South Africa, it was great. I mean, you saw the culture, flourish. I mean, I hated the vuvuzelas, I've got to say, but these tournaments go into like these nations that have never had it before. It really is a celebration of culture, and it's really great. But the legacy in South Africa isn't great following the World Cup. These stadiums that have been built, they're all utilised because they haven't got the demand for that. And so, it's almost like FIFA and the World Cup have came to town. It's been brilliant, and then they've left without caring. Now that those construction contracts and sponsorship deals and whatnot have all been um, have all been paid up, then they don't care, and that's a major issue. Um, Another one we haven't touched on is climate change as well. I mean, the World Cup has a huge carbon cost, like any sport and competition, but I mean, it's arguably the world's largest event. So this is not particularly setting a great example by not only expanding the tournament to 48 teams and also going for multi. We've had multi kind of country or multi nation tournaments before. In the Euros is a good example with like Poland and Ukraine. The Mexico, US, Canada World Cup is just massive. It's like a whole continent, and that's going to have a
Yes.
massive carbon cost. I mean, the Qatar World Cup is set to emit around 3.6 million tons of CO2. I don't really know the context in terms of whether there's a lot or not. I assume it is. It's possibly low for a World Cup because it's such a small nation, so you don't have that. The travel within it is going to be less, but obviously the travel to it is still going to be as high
Yep.
as it would to any competition. But FIFA have said before, and I remember reading an article, I think it was by Jack Pitbrook in The Athletic, around the FIFA World Cups and the carbon cost. And FIFA's, like any organization's kind of argument against their carbon emission um, or emitting is that they're going to start planting trees. I mean, I'm sorry, right? But the carbon cost of what you're doing is right now, amid a climate crisis. If you say you're going to start planting some shrubs out in your garden that are going to take 20, 30 years to grow to offset that, that doesn't help anything, or it might do in 30 years. About 6, 7 World Cups later, you're constantly going to be delayed in that offset. So it's just, I find it crazy because they do that so they can then say, okay, so this offset equals X amount, and therefore, and the carbon cost up front is X amount. Therefore, we've got a carbon neutral competition. You haven't really, have you?
No, yeah, you really haven't. But it's one of those, right, where it helps. When your bed is made of £20 notes and your pillow is made of 50s, it helps you sleep a little bit easier.
Because I mean, it's not. It's an issue of society as a whole. This isn't just an issue that is like exclusive to the World Cup or FIFA. Consumerism as a whole, and this forms part of that. It is part of a major part of climate change and carbon emissions. So it isn't just FIFA that've got to deal with this, but they've got to be part of it, man. And as I said, this is arguably the biggest sporting event, and biggest in terms of size and reach of any sporting competition. So the fact that they're expanding and they're not trying to bring down the carbon costs is pretty damning, I think.
Yeah, you're not wrong, man. Like, it's one of those where it's even with FIFA, and we spoke before about how they're corrupt and how they shouldn't be trusted. They gave a World Cup to Qatar after all the tests and all the checks. We did a pod on it talking about how they managed to do that. And then they thought, you know what? We actually can't host it in the summer. Sorry? What? You delegates or however it worked, I think it was like 3 stages. I can't remember the ins and outs. You've all gone there and you then said to yourselves, yeah, right, yeah, we can do this in the summer. Yeah, fantastic stuff. Everyone votes. Then suddenly you're like, Yeah. What were they going to do? Air conditioned towns or something? Air conditioned domes?
Stadiums,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. People still have to travel from A to B, mate. They're not going to. It's like, and that's the whole thing with FIFA, right? Is a lot of these big companies. It's not just FIFA as well. It's a massive organization. When it comes to ins and outs of climate change, it's always a case of look at this new shiny toy. Okay, how are you going to achieve it? How are you going to offset it? How are you going to make it work? I haven't really thought about bit through. We'll plant trees. That's
Yeah.
that's our go-to, and that's a really really good point for this. So it'd be interesting to see how Wenger evolves in that plan. But yeah, I'm skeptical as to whether he'll give the right answer.
I mean, all love to Wenger as well, so he can do no harm and do no wrong. But yeah, thank you, Etches, for the episode today on whether we'll have a World Cup every 2 years, which it would be great in some ways, but I think there's a lot of question marks over it. And again, as you said, around like the plans for even as far ahead as the 2028 World Cup, we're probably not going to see it come into any sort of realistic plans for a long time. And as you said, Etches, by then you'll be in your 60s. So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
exactly.
but yeah, thank you, Etches, and yeah, thank you all for listening. Continue to subscribe to us on all our platforms, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers, guys.